Welcome to our exploration of Maria Callas's remarkable journey, from a humble Greek-American upbringing to her reign as the world's most revered opera soprano. In this video, we'll uncover the secrets behind her larger-than-life performances, the heartbreaks that haunted her private life, and the unbreakable passion that made her La Divina. If you're curious about the triumphs and tribulations of this legendary voice, stay with us. We're about to reveal the captivating story of Maria Callas. Maria Anna Cecilia Sophia Kalogeropoulos was born in New York City on December 2, 1923. It was a complicated household from the start. A Greek immigrant family living in a cramped apartment, weighed down by financial insecurity and a father's infidelity. Her mother, Evangelia, was bent on finding success for her children, determined to transform Maria into a paragon of vocal brilliance, regardless of Maria's own desires. The father, George, was gentle but emotionally distant, often at odds with the Evangelia's unyielding expectations. From a very young age, Maria was caught in the crossfire of her parents' clashes, forced to endure her mother's demands for constant rehearsals and near-impossible standards of excellence. According to some accounts, Evangelia insisted on voice exercises, even drilling them late into the night, because she believed that if her daughter had any chance at a better life, it would be through the stage. Whenever asked later in life, Maria would speak little about her mother's domination, but certain statements slipped through, perhaps in the hush of private conversations, or during unguarded moments in interviews. "I sang so that my mother might love me," she once confessed, hinting at the complexity of a relationship that was both nurturing and smothering. It was the seed of her lifelong conflict between the grandeur of her artistry and the fragility of her heart. Because if singing was the way she earned affection at home, she would eventually carry that mindset into the greater world. Applause equaled love, and love was a thing she needed desperately, yet could never truly secure. During these early years in New York, she was hardly the graceful figure who would later stun audiences with her dramatic transformations on stage. She wore thick, round glasses and carried extra weight, details that critics and gossip columnists would fixate upon years later. Her older sister, Jackie, was considered the pretty one, the daughter more naturally inclined toward a standard feminine ideal. In contrast, Maria was the one saddled with the weight, quite literally, of potential. She was teased for her size and teased for her seriousness, but the one thing nobody dared tease was her voice. Even in childhood, her raw vocal power was remarkable. She could sustain high notes with startling ease, and her timbre had a dark, emotional quality that belied her age. Evangelia perceived these gifts as evidence that her daughter was destined for greatness. But life in the United States was harsh in the 1930s, particularly during the Great Depression. The pharmacy that George owned could barely stay afloat, and the family's finances remained precarious. Tensions rose as Evangelia and George fought not only about money, but about how best to shape their children's futures. Evangelia decided the only way forward was to return to Greece, that cradle of ancient culture where perhaps Maria's gift might flourish more naturally. So around the age of 13, Maria embarked on a journey across the Atlantic back to her ancestral homeland, leaving behind the swirl of New York. It was a radical shift from the hustle and bustle of an American city to an Athens that was both majestic in its classical legacy and trembling at the edge of Europe's looming conflicts. In Athens, the family settled into a modest apartment, but it was worlds apart from New York. Maria found herself adapting to a new language, though Greek was spoken at home in America as well, so she had some grounding. She enrolled at the Athens Conservatoire, under the tutelage of the famous Spanish soprano Elvira de Hidalgo, who recognized instantly that this teenager possessed one of those once-in-a-generation voices. Hidalgo focused on the bel canto style, the foundation for many classical Italian operas that demand precision, agility, and a capacity to weave intricate vocal lines as if they were spun from silk. It is here that Maria honed the superlative technique that would later define her. Yet behind every success were daily hardships. Athens in the 1930s slid into turmoil, and the outbreak of World War II soon cast a long shadow over Greece. Occupying forces arrived. Food grew scarce. Bombings and curfews defined everyday existence. Even war, however, could not stop Maria from singing. On the contrary, it was often precisely the oppression and fear that inspired her to sing more passionately. She performed whenever she could, giving recitals, participating in local opera productions, and absorbing influences from older, established Greek sopranos. In these teenage years, she had a hunger for repertoire. She was unafraid to tackle roles typically reserved for those with far more experience, driven as she was by an almost obsessive focus on perfection. Some older colleagues marveled at the way she managed to inhabit such demanding roles, while others resented her youth and ambition. But the adversity of war also steeled her spirit. She learned how to take on a challenge without complaint, how to press forward even when the circumstances were dire. If you can perform an opera in an unheated, half-ruined theater while bombs threaten to fall overhead, you can do almost anything on stage later in life. By the time the war ended, Maria had blossomed into a formidable performer. She was no longer the shy, bespectacled teenager, but a confident, passionate vocalist, eager to conquer the larger opera world. When the opportunity arose to return to the United States after World War II, she seized it, hoping to break into the big leagues. Metropolitan opera, perhaps, or major touring companies. But success in America proved elusive at first. The competition was fierce, the culture different than she remembered, and the connections she needed were not readily offered. She auditioned, she met with managers, but it felt like an uphill climb. Critics took note of her raw talent, but weren't sure what to do with a voice of such heft and dramatic coloratura ability. At one point, short on money, she even considered singing in musicals, something she wasn't entirely opposed to, but which might have derailed her path into grand opera. Fate, however, nudged her toward a more suitable direction. Tullio Serafin, a distinguished Italian conductor, recognized that her future truly lay in Italy, the cradle of operatic tradition. He extended an invitation for her to sing in Verona, and from there, her life pivoted. In Italy, Maria was confronted with the environment that would define her for the next decade. The country's opera scene was revered and daunting, with established stars guarding their turf and audiences unafraid to boo if a performer failed to meet their high standards. She arrived unpolished in certain respects, but with an unstoppable drive, and crucially, a willingness to take on roles that required near superhuman agility. When she stunned the crowds with her performances of works like I Puritani and La Gioconda, people realized this newcomer was no ordinary soprano. She bridged the gap between dramatic soprano weight and bel canto flexibility, something that few others, if any, managed to do at the time. She quickly became indispensable to some of Italy's greatest opera houses. Conductors sought her out. Agents clamored to book her. Audiences gasped at her ability to sustain high notes while simultaneously injecting raw, palpable emotion into each phrase. The newspapers marveled at the young Greek American who seemed to have soared out of obscurity. Yet swirling around her, too, were whispers of arrogance and signs of friction with fellow performers. She was unwavering in her demands for excellence, not just from herself but from others. Stage managers who cut corners, co-stars who didn't know their parts, or conductors who tried to mold her voice in ways she disagreed with often met her fiery temper. The seeds of her diva reputation were planted here. But that same intensity made her unstoppable on stage. In these early triumphs, she also found the man who would become her first husband, Giovanni Battista Meneghini, an older industrialist who admired her talent deeply and offered her both moral and financial support. They married in 1949. Meneghini took it upon himself to manage her career, negotiating contracts and guarding her interests. The relationship, though far from passionately romantic, provided a foundation of stability for a singer whose life had known very little of that. Maria cherished Meneghini's devotion, even if she never seemed entirely infatuated with him. Her unstoppable ascent in opera circles continued. By the 1950s, she was an international phenomenon. La Scala in Milan became her artistic home, where she took on signature roles: Violetta in La Traviata, Norma in Bellini's masterpiece, Lady Macbeth in Verdi's blood-soaked drama, and many others. She ushered in a revival of the bel canto repertoire that had fallen out of favor. In doing so, she almost single-handedly changed the course of modern opera. Her approach to these roles transcended the old standards of park and bark singing. She used her entire body, face, and voice to convey the character's psychology. Critics and fans praised her ability to breathe life into heroines who had long been treated as little more than decorative figures. She was unafraid to show vulnerability, heartbreak, fury, or terror, each emanating naturally from her singing. Even those who disliked her as a person had to concede that she was revolutionizing the art form. Audiences left the theater in stunned silence, or tears, or bursts of frenzied applause. Some nights it seemed as though she was unstoppable, that no vocal line was out of reach, no emotional depth too profound to explore. But behind the scenes, friction was growing. She argued with theater administrations over salaries and contract terms. She wasn't shy about seeking fair pay, which was still unusual for a woman in that era, especially a woman with a Mediterranean temperament and little tolerance for condescension. Colleagues who felt overshadowed began spreading gossip that she was unprofessional or temperamental. Whenever she canceled or postponed a performance due to illness or vocal strain, the media would pounce, painting it as another Callas fiasco. The 1958 Rome incident stands out. She withdrew from Norma after one act with the Italian president in attendance. She cited illness. Her detractors said she was simply throwing a tantrum. That moment exploded into a global scandal, fueling debates about her reliability and overshadowing her artistry for months, even years, afterward. The stress of maintaining her breakneck schedule, coupled with the intense media scrutiny, began to take its toll on her psychologically and vocally. Some heard a subtle brittleness creeping into her top notes, a sign that her gift might be wearing under incessant strain. In 1957, at a glittering social event, she crossed paths with Aristotle Onassis. He was perhaps the only Greek in the world more famous than Maria herself, a shipping magnate with a flamboyant presence and unearthly fortune and a penchant for the most extravagant luxuries. He was drawn to her magnetism. She was drawn to his power. Their native Greek heritage might have given them a sense of immediate kinship, like two unstoppable forces from the same ancient lineage. Maria's marriage to Meneghini had provided stability, but it lacked that fiery passion she found in the roles she sang on stage. Onassis, in contrast, was a swirl of intensity, ambition, and swagger. Gossip columnists could smell a sensational romance forming from miles away. Inevitably, she took the plunge. She left Meneghini, causing outrage among fans who felt she was betraying the loyal husband who'd supported her. But she believed she'd found the grand love she had always craved. She scaled back her performances, no longer feeling the compulsion to sing nonstop. She traveled with Onassis on his lavish yacht, mingled with aristocrats and Hollywood icons, and fantasized about having children, a dream she had never managed to fulfill in her earlier life. Onassis made her feel adored, at least for a time, and those who spent time with them recall a surprising sense of tenderness between the two. She sang for him in private moments, softly, with none of the performing bravado she usually displayed on stage. It was as if she was giving him a direct line to her soul, a part of her rarely glimpsed by the outside world. But Onassis's appetites were legendary, and monogamy was never his strong suit. Rumors started that he was flirting with other women, and the tabloids fixated on each morsel of gossip, fueling talk that Callas was being set up for heartbreak. She must have sensed the shifting ground beneath her feet, but she clung to the vision of a domestic life that had always eluded her. She no longer felt the same craving to conquer new operatic roles, because now she wanted to conquer a personal dream, to be a devoted partner, perhaps a mother, a woman outside the glare of stage lights. In devoting herself to him, she risked losing the fiery artistic purpose that had shaped her destiny. By the late 1960s, everything she'd built with Onassis crumbled. One day the news stunned the world. Onassis had married Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of the late President John F. Kennedy. This union shocked not just the planet, but above all, Maria Callas, who reportedly learned about the marriage through news headlines just like everyone else. She discovered she'd been cast aside for one of the most iconic women in recent American history. The sense of betrayal was massive. She withdrew from social life, refusing to talk about it publicly. Journalists clamored for her reaction. She offered nothing but a dignified silence that belied her devastation. It was a heartbreak that might have overshadowed any tragedy she portrayed in her operatic roles. She had loved him with the intensity of a Tosca or a Medea, but in real life she stood powerless as he legally bound himself to someone else. Some say that from that day on the flame in her voice dimmed. After all, her return to the stage in the late 1960s and early 1970s was rocky at best. Critics who attended her comeback tours noted that her voice didn't have the same suppleness, that her top register sounded precarious and prone to cracks. Where once the entire opera house would tremble under her power, now it felt uncertain, as though she might lose control mid-aria. Still, audiences flocked to see her, some out of curiosity, to witness a legendary figure trying to recapture old glory, others out of steadfast love for the woman who had given them years of musical transcendence. On certain nights, she achieved moments of brilliance that recalled her prime, but those nights were intermittent, overshadowed by missed high notes or abrupt cancellations. She seemed caught between a longing to reclaim her identity and a deep, paralyzing sadness. It's rumored that she simply couldn't cope with the emptiness left by Onassis's betrayal, and that the stage, once her refuge, now felt hollow without the driving force of wanting to impress the man she loved. She made a final attempt at reinvention when she agreed to star in Pier Paolo Pasolini's film Medea, but that role didn't require her to sing, which was perhaps a bittersweet mercy. Her voice was no longer what it used to be, and she may have known she risked overshadowing the film with speculation about her vocal decline. Still, the movie demonstrated her raw acting ability and her capacity to inhabit the psyche of a tragic figure, which many claimed was a reflection of her own heartache. As the 1970s wore on, she withdrew more and more into a private world. She lived quietly in Paris, kept a handful of close friends, and remained haunted by regrets. According to various accounts, she would listen to her old recordings at night, perhaps recalling the days when she could stun an audience of thousands into breathless awe. She wrote letters to Onassis that went unanswered or were merely acknowledged with a polite courtesy devoid of affection. The once unstoppable goddess of the stage was now a solitary figure in an upscale but lonely Paris apartment. Rumors that she was addicted to sleeping pills and tranquilizers spread, though it's hard to separate fact from rumor. Depression seemed certain. Some nights, acquaintances found her in a melancholic daze, unable or unwilling to engage in conversation about her past or her future. She died in that apartment on September 16, 1977, with the official cause listed as a heart attack. There was no grand funeral attended by heads of state, no lines of admirers paying final respects at a casket. In time, her ashes were scattered in the Aegean Sea near her native Greece, a symbolic gesture returning her to the land that had molded her voice through war and adversity. Opera houses around the world paid tribute, yet it felt oddly disjointed, as if many in the industry had never fully come to terms with the complexity of who she was. A handful of luminaries acknowledged her genius, but official ceremonies were reserved. Perhaps too many old resentments lingered among the opera establishment, or perhaps they simply didn't know how to mourn a legend who had fallen so far from her pedestal before she passed. Then, in the decades that followed, the myth of Maria Callas grew. Books were published, some factual, some sensational, all trying to decipher the woman behind the mesmerizing voice. Documentaries and docudramas spliced together newsreels of her performances and interviews, analyzing her technique, her personal relationships, her rumored child with Onassis, an unconfirmed rumor that some cling to. Her name became a shorthand for operatic greatness and tragic love, a voice that soared above all others, only to be wrecked by a man who chose a more famous woman to marry. Some shaped her story into a cautionary tale for every brilliant woman who invests her heart in the wrong place, for every artist who becomes so consumed by love and devotion that she forgets how to stand alone. Today, for those who delve deeply into her recordings, the fascination remains. Performances of Casta Diva from Bellini's Norma, Vici d'arte from Puccini's Tosca, or La Mamma Morta from Giordano's Andrea Chenier continue to captivate decades after her death. She had a way of filling each note with emotional weight, as though she channeled her entire life experience, her childhood yearning, the war in Athens, the heartbreak with Onassis, into those fleeting moments of sound. Even newcomers to opera can sense something extraordinary, something raw in her voice. She was never the picture of sterile technical perfection, but that might be why she was so enthralling. You believed every note because it sounded as though it was being ripped from her soul. Thank you for joining us in unraveling Maria Callas's dramatic tale, a story filled with extraordinary vocal prowess, dazzling triumphs, and poignant heartbreaks. If you found her life as mesmerizing as her voice, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most fascinating icons. We appreciate your time and look forward to bringing you more compelling stories from the stage and beyond. Until next time, stay inspired.